Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars on the Tabletop. Now you might be saying, don't you mean G.I. Joe on the tabletop? Well, yes, normally that would be the case. Although I do another podcast called Beyond the First Marker. In fact, there's the logo right there. And I do it with a friend named Drew, who when I DJ is literally the man I share the turntables with. And on that show, we literally talk about how to build themed armies and themed forces to match battles and forces from the Star Wars universe. So it's only natural, since we're talking all the time about how to use our hobby skills to create themed forces, that we probably should show you what some of these look like. So joining me today is Drew. Drew, how you doing?
I'm really good, man. How you doing?
I'm good. Or should I say Drew Baca? Right on.
It's good to get my face on here finally. I say that ironically because we're still working through the technology of getting my face on here.
Yeah, sorry guys, that's me. I'm still figuring out the ins and outs of YouTubing, but as a teacher who's teaching online at the moment, I am getting better. And as we go, we will have Drew's face on as well. We will be here simultaneously. And hopefully when social distancing is done, the two of us can appear on camera at the same time. Maybe even in the same room. Who would have thought?
What?
But today we're going to talk about the Mimban Stormtroopers. Now, Mimban Stormtroopers are called that, obviously, because they are part of the Imperial forces that take part in the battle for Mimban, or Mimban, depending on how you say it. Now, these are not to be confused with the Imperial army, which was also very prevalent in that battle and that conflict. Now, Imperial soldiers, just basic grunts, wore special gear, environmental gear, and were called mud troopers. Now, you will see a couple of my mud trooper officers as part of this force later. But today we're going to focus on how you can take existing Star Wars Legion stormtroopers and turn them into something a little different. Now, Mimban, or Mimban, the battle of which is what we're talking about, obviously. But in that battle, it had taken place for hundreds of years. It had continued. The Separatists had started mining the planets prior to the Clone Wars starting. Then the Clone Wars continued. The planet was eventually liberated by clones working in conjunction with the Mimbanese people. But then eventually, when the Galactic Empire came into being, they wanted those resources as well. So the Mimbanese fought off the Separatists, only to find themselves under the yoke of the Imperial, the Great Boot, I guess, is how we'd say this. And so the battle continues, and we see that, of course, in the movie Solo. Now, if we look at the picture here, you can see the best boy band picture ever, and that is 3 Mimban Stormtroopers. Now, Drew, would you like to tell us a little bit about the armor, and what are some of the things that you notice about that makes Mimban Stormtroopers different from regular ones?
Probably the most, if we look past them being filthy, which
Yes.
we never see clean Mimban Stormtrooper armor, so maybe it's made that way. Probably the most obvious thing you see after that is the cape that they're wearing.
Correct. Yeah, that tarp or that cape or that cloak, if you Google search it, comes up a number of different ways, is a water-resistant cloak that they can wrap themselves in at night to keep warm, because the planet is all mud and everything's been stripped out. All the heat dissipates out. So while during the day it can be muddy and wet and humid and cloying, at night a lot of the heat disappears and they need to wrap themselves up to keep cool as well. To keep warm in the cool. So very true. You'll also notice, if you look carefully, and I didn't notice until I actually read the description, that if you look at this picture, you can clearly see some of the leg, hip, and chest and armor is actually cut out around the joints. It's actually less protective than a normal stormtrooper's armor, because they're going to be, the soldiers will be deployed into the mud and the muck and the mire. They need a greater range of movement in order to get around, and they also need slightly lighter armor. Now that does mean they are slightly less protected, but hey, they're still wearing stormtrooper armor, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a look at our next photo. And there you can see a close-up of the front. Now, you'll notice that this trooper, who was seen in the background of the last photo, has a bandolier across his chest. That was a common feature on a lot of the soldiers that appeared in Solo. That is a common feature, and so I wanted to include that on my troopers as well. A lot of the nods, because this is trench warfare, it's in the muck. A lot of the things that we see in these stormtrooper photos relate directly to German armor in World War II. Now, if we look on the next photo, you will see the forehead plate that really does make the Mimban Stormtrooper completely different from a regular Stormtrooper. It has a reinforced forehead plate. Now, in the novels, and if you read any of the tech manuals for Solo, you'll know that they say that it's full of sensors, and it's full of different ways that allow people to see, allow the stormtroopers to see different spectrums, to avoid night ambushes and that sort of thing. But we will get to a picture in a second of a German World War I helmet of a trench grenadier, and if you look at that, it is literally the same plate. So it's reinforced.
It's got that same clip. Slot.
It does, and it's the same armor, so that when you peek out of a trench, you have your forehead is better protected, even than a regular helmet. It's like a double reinforced helmet. I'm sorry, Drew, I'm doing a lot of the talking here. Are you happy with how I'm explaining this? Do you want to add anything else?
I'll just chime in when I see something.
Sounds good. Well, here's a picture of the German helmet. As Drew said, you can very clearly see the clips on the side that it sort of slots into. Now, it doesn't have the strap, but you could paint that on if you wanted to, but that is not actually in the film. Now, the cloak is interesting in that it comes down, it's got a hood that comes up, and it's also triangular in the way that the bottom is cut. Now, you'll notice that there are, on each of the triangular points, there are circular rings that you can run cords through. Now, because I was talking about creating, Star Wars Legion scale models, I actually didn't bother putting those rings in. I just didn't think it would make a big difference. Now, this is actually a picture of a Stormtrooper action figure, a Mimban Stormtrooper. They actually, for this action figure, only added the cloak and the helmet. And if you look at the armor joints, you'll see that it's a regular Stormtrooper. So it's actually not the same as the Mimban Stormtrooper that we just saw in the pictures before that. Now, Drew, tell us about the weapons that these guys carry.
So they're still carrying E11 blasters, which is the standard issue blaster for Stormtroopers.
That's right. In some of the fluff, it says that they either carry an E10,
which is the predecessor.
Which is the predecessor of the E11 or the E11. But even in the fluff websites where they talk specifically about the E10 being different from the E11, they basically say it's the same. So when I went to build my forces, I left the traditional Stormtrooper guns on there. You can buy E10s through different shops on Shapeways. I found, though, that they were slightly smaller scale, so I left the original Stormtrooper weapons on there. Now, here's a picture of one of my Mimban Stormtroopers. Now, if you take a look at this, you will see that I have modeled the bandolier on. And you'll also notice that the helmet is translucent. That is because that is a 3D printed helmet from Skullforge. And we will talk about that in just a second. Now, Drew, you've done a lot of green stuff work on your models, and this is nothing like anything you've done. This is very, very basic. I basically made a sausage of green stuff and then just flattened the edges and put lines in. Would you do anything different when you were doing this? Because you are really the hobby guru here.
If I'm going to look at if I'm going to look at the close-up image and compare that to yours, look at this scale. It's probably not a lot I would do to it. You might do a little bit of impressioning with the tool, sort of going horizontally across each of those pouches, just to suggest some flaps or opening. But they're not very pronounced even in the image. There's probably not that much need to go there. You could probably even paint that stuff on, and it would be fine, because there's not a lot of relief there.
Yeah, I tried to paint on extra detail when I did this, but given how basic the shapes were in the source images, that I just kept my sculpting super simple. And guys, I just did that with the back of a hobby blade. So it really doesn't require a lot of sculpting if you haven't had a chance to do it before.
If people are worried about sculpting, really at this scale, especially for a whole army, for something you're doing across a whole force, just having it there is going to look. The difference between having it and not having it is far more pronounced than the difference between having it and having it with super small detail on it. People won't see that stuff. Definitely won't see that stuff from across the table. Whereas
exactly.
The bandolier is visible. The pouches, the straps, the flaps on it, maybe not so much.
Exactly. Well, I know that a lot of people will say, okay, you have the helmets, and that makes the Mimban Stormtrooper really look like a Stormtrooper. Now, what you can see here is one of my basic troopers. As you can see, I left the standard E11 from the basic core set Stormtroopers on that model. But I did add, as I said, the Skullforged 3D printed helmet. They come on sprues, and I will have a picture of them digitally in a second. But they come on a sprue. You get 7 on a sprue, which is enough for a squad. And they do have a nub at the bottom, which you can't necessarily see in this video. But if you cut them flush at the bottom and then use a pair of hobby snips to cut the Stormtrooper helmet off at the shoulders before you put the arms on, you can then use a hobby knife to just sort of shave it flat, and the two fit remarkably well. I chose to have most of my helmet sit as close as I could to the chest piece. In later Stormtroopers, I started leaving a little bit of a neck, but then when I tried to add the cloak later, sometimes it was problematic. Now the cloak is another, of course, integral part. I got these cloaks through Victoria Miniatures, and I'll have a picture of them in a minute. They do have the square bottom. They're not triangular, but nobody's called me on it yet, so I don't mind. But the helmet and the cloak are the elements that really make the Stormtroopers look like Mimban Stormtroopers. And that's what I shot for.
Because I'm going to say, the changes to the armor, I really only noticed them when you pointed them out to me. So
yeah. And I think that the standard Stormtroopers, a lot of them in the elbow and maybe in the chest, you could paint that in. The legs would take some heavy-duty cutting and resculpting. And again, nobody's noticed. So I think when we're talking about scale, as you mentioned before, no one's going to necessarily notice unless you point it out. And unfortunately, I just did. So I tried to keep it simple and tried to keep with the major pieces. Now, I did cut the necks of the cloaks off, and I stuck the cloak onto the back of the Stormtrooper, and then I just green stuffed the joint between the head and where the cloak would run under the helmet. This is maybe not the best photo of my work there. Because there were folds in the hood, I just tried to match it and then slip it under the helmet. And I think it looks good in person once we get started. Now, here's a picture of the 3D printed helmets. This is the digital picture that you can get through Shapeways. If you go to Skullforged Miniatures on Shapeway, you can find these. I believe they're called environmental helmets. And they are, as you can see, they have the reinforced foreheads. They are perfect. They are literally Mimban Stormtrooper helmets, and they are perfectly in scale with Star Wars Legion models. So I can't recommend them enough. I'm a huge Skullforge fan, as is Drew. Hashtag Skullforge. But these helmets are perfect, and without them, I could not have done this army. And here are the cloaks from Victoria Miniatures. There are a lot of companies that make cloaks for Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer Fantasy armies. And in fact, there's even some Skaven cloaks from Mordheim that I cut down and used for some of my heavy weapon troopers because they were easier to shave and to stick in the joins between the backpack built into the heavy weapon stormtroopers models and their shoulders, so it looks like the cloaks sort of hanging down in between the two. But these cloaks are available in Australia. They're really fantastic. The casting and the resin's clear, and it just works really well. Drew, I know that you are a man who loves to convert. Do you think that the helmets are a gimme, but do you have any other cloak ideas, or you think these Victorian ones work as well?
Look, they work fine. I think a cloak's a cloak. As you said, you haven't got the triangular shape there, but again, you don't really notice it from the front so much.
Exactly.
It's probably something that you could probably have a go at modeling yourself if you were feeling creative. So if you did want to have a go at making them out of green stuff, you could just roll out a really thin sheet of the stuff and then with minimal finger contact, just bunch it up. That's one way you can do it.
I just happen to know I have these big paws, and I would have put all the fingerprints in all of my cloaks, so I went with the pre-sculpted versions.
For anyone who hasn't tried any green stuff sculpting, just remember, Anakin's rubbish at it. You can do better than Anakin. So
yes.
Have a go.
Yes, exactly. And let it dry.
Yes.
Let it dry between applications. Put a little bit down, let it dry, then add on top of it. Do it in layers. But wait 12 to 24 hours before you put the next layer on. Trust me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll put your fingerprints all over it, and it'll be a nightmare to get out. All right. So here's a picture of my actual Mimban Stormtroopers. Now, I have an entire army of these guys, but I didn't want to just have the entire force laid out. I chose some choice troopers to show you. Here are an example of some of the basic Stormtroopers from the box set. I have added some of the new specialist boxes, and those work equally well. Now, you'll notice that you can't really see much of the cloaks. They'll be poking out on the sides on some of these models. But I did turn one of them around so you can see the cloak there. Now, I tried to use, I painted these using a sponge method. Now, Drew will tell you that I'm one of the slowest infantry painters in history.
This is probably one of the first times I've seen Brad paint infantry, like full stop.
In a while. And Drew, how long did it take me to get through this?
I thought it was actually pretty quick. Really,
yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, really quick.
I painted the entire Stormtrooper part of this army in a week and a half, and so I spray painted these models gray, and then I sponged very dirty, light sponging of white over the top. I did another very light sponging of white over the top of that. And then I did a pin wash of black ink, and I added some highlights, and I blacklined in a few of the joints so that you would see the definition between the plates. And that was that. And then I took my time, and I actually put 4 layers of gray on all of the blasters, and I think there are 6 layers of gray on every cloak. So I took my time on the details that wasn't the white, and it seemed to work well. So, yeah.
Is that a wooden stock on the DLT?
It is a wooden stock on the DLT. I am a bolt action player by trade. So that is suspiciously looking like an MG34 or an MG42. So I may have put the wooden stock from an MG42 on there, but yes, that is a wooden stock. I painted them without realizing that I had painted them that way, and then I looked at it and went, "Yeah, maybe
I think
I shouldn't have done it in wood." But it is a nice color break. If you look at the sergeant, not only does he have the color pauldron, but he also has a leather pouch on his leg. So
yeah.
I tried to add some other colors. But let me move on to the next bet. Now you can see the guy, I pulled out the exact trooper that we looked at before, that I put the very basic bandolier on. As you can see, I tried to paint some detail on, but yes, there you have him. He's there, and I painted him next to an E-Web. Now, for those familiar with Legion, you will know that E-Webs come with Snowtrooper crew. Skullforge Studios, not to plug them again, but hashtag Skullforge, do make Stormtrooper crew for an E-Web that matches the existing Fantasy Flight Games E-Web. So I used those troopers and added cloaks. Yes, Drew.
And I just put that out there and say, I was like, one of my, as a modeler and a hobbyist, like this kind of one of my bugbears with the game is that you have special environmental gear attached to certain weapons. So like this and the pizza gun for the rebels.
Yep.
Who are by default snowtroopers, and again by default snowtroopers with the E-Web, which shouldn't necessarily be the case. So it's cool that you can buy like just sort of more generic versions of those crew, like you've got here.
That's right, and you can get generic rebel crewmen for the pizza gun as well.
Yeah.
Through Skullforge. Now I have added that there. Now I love, just to touch on something you said, one of the reasons why I absolutely love the idea of the Mimban Stormtrooper army is that, yes, it looks a little different from a normal Stormtrooper army, but because you are readjusting every single head, I was able to create far more variety in the troopers. And I did recut some of the arms to change how high and how low guys were aiming, and change the weapons between different troopers. So there was greater variety. Between regular Stormtroopers, there are only a few poses, and they do get a little dry sometimes. But by mixing up the cloaks and by changing the positions of the heads, it really did add a lot of variety. And then by adding a couple of more arm positions and arm swaps, I have a Stormtrooper army that doesn't look like it's the same 6 or 7 guys, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Which is what I wanted all along. Now, I did mention before that Mud Troopers were the Imperial soldiers, not to be confused with the Stormtroopers, in the conflict. Now, I do have 2 Mud Troopers from Skullforge Miniatures. You'll have to excuse this photo. I didn't realize that they were slightly blurry. But you can get a proper Mud Trooper squad, full squad, and it looks fantastic. The only reason I haven't bought an entire Mud Trooper force from Skullforged, despite my love of this conflict and my love of Skullforged, is because we don't have Imperial, basic Imperial troops that you could really use to represent them. I suppose you could use them as Stormtroopers, but I already have a Mimban Stormtrooper army. So, if we ever do get basic, the security forces from the bunker in Endor, or the guys in the black suits in the Death Star, if we get those, I'm absolutely going to be making a Mimban Mud Trooper army. But I bought the officer, which you can see on the left here, to use as a generic officer. And I got a Mud Trooper officer who I could also use as a generic officer. When I run my Mimban Stormtrooper army, I typically run a generic leader. I don't have any special named hero types in that force, because that we knew we didn't have any in the Solo movie. It was just generic guys. And so I often add... to supplement that, add an ATST, or hopefully, if Skullforge's teaser photos for the last while are true, hopefully I'll be adding an ADTT, DT to my force. which for those who play 40K is a basilisk on legs, and for those familiar with World War II, it's an 88 on legs. Drew, am I missing anything here, or do you think we've done a good job of talking about Mimban Stormtroopers, how you can make them and how you can add them to your forces on the table?
No, I think that's it. And you supplement this with not everything needs to be Mimban in your force. You know, you can still have some. You can even have some clean stormtroopers come down just as reinforcements. Although that would be early on in their deployment. But I think the ATDT, if that comes out, is going to look really cool. Look, you probably just use it as an ATST for now. Maybe put that mortar on it so that it fits the kind of gun that is on the model. But
that is literally what I was going to use. That, and when I'm putting these guys on the table, I would give each and every squad that I can the environmental gear upgrade, because that's what they have. Yeah. But yes, that's how I'd theme them. Well, guys, if this is the first time we've done this sort of thing, I know I talked a lot, but this was sort of my force. Next time, I think we're probably going to talk about Drew's Hoth Troopers, because he's put an amazing amount of work in converting those, and it is absolutely 100% worth looking at that force in detail. And Drew will be doing way more talking in that episode because we just so many great hobby tips and tidbits that we can share in that episode. This was sort of the basic to show you what we are hoping to do more of in the future, and that will include Drew's face.
And it'd be good to also keep our eyes open for people in the community that have got some really strong themes in their armies, and maybe showcase them as well.
Absolutely. Well said, sir. Well said. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not found Beyond the First Marker, the podcast, and you'd like to hear us talking more about our themes and hear Drew beating me senseless in the trivia competition that we're having, please listen. You can find us in your regular friendly iTunes store. It is under the Cast Dice. You can see the logo here. Cast Dice is the network that we appear on. And it's the YouTube channel that you're watching right now. We hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have feedback for us, please comment below. If you've liked what we're doing, or if you want to see my G.I. Joe stuff, well, just click to the channel and you will see all of that as well. You can see me talking hours and hours of my love of G.I. Joe and how to represent those units and vehicles on a regular wargaming tabletop. And guys, we're getting better at this. We hope you enjoy, but if you have feedback for us, let us know. Till next time.